Hello folks, this is Kyle Graves. Today I wanted to talk to you about a few pitfalls, both inside and outside of the intellectual property sphere, that I see startups making. This is a talk that I prepared for a conference some time ago, and my notes are written here, so you'll see me look down occasionally if you're watching on video today. But I wanted to go through corporate and structural issues. I wanted to go through employee and founder issues, and I wanted to talk about protecting brands and technology and a few pitfalls that often come up as startups are trying to move from the very frothy and early stages of their business into a more sophisticated operating mode. So beginning with corporate pitfalls, let's start with a quote from Stephen Covey, and this philosophy I think is very effective for startups. As you're making decisions, each startup should begin with the end in mind. You need to figure out what your long-term objective is, not just for this product, but for your company. Now, there are a few different types of ends. It may be a liquidity event you're looking at, funding, acquisition, a roll-up. Once you have this in mind, then you'll be much better suited to choose the appropriate path around a certain pitfall as it comes up. Okay, so here's our first one. You need solid and separate financial records. Many startups have finances commingled with their owners or their founders. This can be a tax issue. This can be an issue during valuation, during an exit or funding event, or any other type of audit. Another pitfall is not doing an operating agreement. Very often an entity is formed and the founders get off to the races developing tech. You don't just want to form an entity. You need also to have an operating agreement or a charter that reflects the ownership and the management of the company. At some point, you're going to have a partnership dispute. The statutes are not enough to guide you through this. You really need to have an operating agreement to help. Now, another pitfall is relying on your relationships, your good relationships with your co-founders, instead of papering things. You may know and trust your co-founder, and you may be aligned on mission and values. But what about their spouse? What about their kids? What about their insurance company? They may be hit by a bus. Do you know about their other business dealings? Do you know about their other potential liabilities? You really need to paper things, even in a friendly relationship with someone that you trust very much. Okay. How often do you fail to document when people enter and leave on the cap table, and then later on you're confused about how to allocate shares? One of the best ways to ruin a deal is to ensure that the people who are trying to pay you money can't figure out who to pay that money to. You really need to clearly identify your founding group. Another related pitfall is having a very complex cap table. When someone wants to give you money, you need to make it easy for them to give you money. How about your entity? You don't want to form the wrong entity. There's a lot of opinions on entity type. If you have one, please share it if there's comments on this platform. But don't form any S corporations. It's very hard to raise capital. Now, what you could do, you could set up an LLC as a disregarded entity, and then later you can convert it to a C Corp or start a subsidiary. You can do a lot of things, but please don't form any S corporations. By staying flexible on entity, you will avoid closing doors early, and your funder may have an entity they want you to convert to. You can do that later. Okay? How about brokers? How about investment bankers? Should you accept the first draft of the first agreement they put in front of you? Probably not. You probably need to have counsel look over it with you. Now, this one is a big social media gotcha. We see this a lot with some of the emerging finance, cryptocurrency, Bitcoin type apps. But raising capital without appropriate legal advice is a good way to accidentally commit a felony. So don't do that. Don't raise capital without legal advice. What if you treat everybody as an independent contractor? Well, you can't pretend somebody into being an independent contractor. They either are or aren't under law and under state law. So you need a little bit of counsel on this point. Now, what about restrictive covenants? What about your early key employees? Non-competes, non-solicitation agreements, non-disclosure, IP ownership, special rules for California, because California has some special statutory things to be aware of. You need to paper your restrictive covenants before one of your co-founders goes out and starts a competing company using trade secrets, perhaps, that came out of your company. Be careful about this. Now, moving on to regulated industries, there's all kinds of pitfalls specific to regulated industries. You'll need some specific counsel here. But I want to flag a few issues for you to think about. Spam emails, so much regulation here. Cryptocurrency, banking, regulation's always changing here. You got to be really on top of your game. And then intellectual property. Now this is what I like to talk about. IP. Do your key employees own the IP they generate? Does the company own it? Does the founder own it? What about hiring vendors for prototyping activity? Have you audited that activity to ensure that assignments of rights are in place? These are all things that you need to keep in mind. Now, I have seen deals really held up by early key vendors who have anti-assignment clauses or who have unclear contractual relationships with you. In a related note, college student employees can be a real vector of digital hygiene concerns. And what I mean by that is they're associated with a university that has IP ownership policies for things invented with university resources. Do you know if those college students are using university resources when they work on your project? If you don't, you should figure it out and create some policies, some guidelines to help separate and cabin off these two worlds of IP that your student may be associated with. Also, frequently a problem, failing to maintain secrecy of your inventions until you've decided about what you're going to do with patents. You need to file an application before disclosure. In most countries, in the US, you do have a grace period. You need to document the inventorship accurately. You need to get signed declarations and assignments from everyone that's involved. Inventors, when they're particularly at the early part of the invention process, are probably on the same page with you and aligned with your mission. It's a great time to get declarations and assignments completed. Okay, how about your marketing folks? Your brand. Are you picking brands without clearing the marks first? You may spend a lot of time investing in a brand, and as soon as you reach enough prominence that people begin to notice you, then you start getting cease and desist letters because other people who have prior rights to that brand have finally noticed you. That's the time when you least want to be dealing with cease and desist letters. So why don't you screen the brand first, then pick the brand, then invest in all of that marketing collateral, and you won't have these issues pop up later. Art and code. When you hire independent contractor artists and you don't get an express written assignment of rights, it's very likely that you don't own that art and don't own that code. You have a license, but you don't own it. Now, this can really hold up a deal later, as can sneaky open source with copyleft terms that independent contractor programmers use because you haven't clearly defined the scope of the project. So be careful about getting written assignments and define the scope of what resources can and cannot be used for the development of your art and code. So, as counsel for companies going through deals, I'm usually involved in the process during one of two situations. Either when an acquirer is determining whether to buy or invest, or when an acquirer has committed to a deal and is trying to close. Now, in the first situation, I'm evaluating the quality of the assets, management of the risks, and our primary concerns are related to the quality of the IP, business structure, is the equity and cap table in writing, what are the condition of the assets, physical assets, IP assets. For copyright, you must have written assignments from founders and contractors. They're treated differently from employees. You need it written down. For patents, you need written assignments from the inventors. You must also maintain secrecy until certain filings have been made. And for trademark, is your brand infringing any other brands? And will this brand become a problem later? Those are the key things we think about during the go, no-go decision stage. Now, in situation 2, when we're already committed to close, the inquiries are a little different. Our primary goal is cleanup. We want to get the deal done. We want to clean up the issues. Oftentimes, IP issues are not a deal killer unless the issues are very significant. And some very significant ones may be copyleft open source code and unresolved credible third-party claims. Very often, with money and time, we can clean up the other things. So this is something that I think would be effective if you're an early stage founder and you want to evolve yourself both on the corporate and the IP side with understanding and mitigating your risks early, but you don't want to spend too much money doing it. Addressing these pitfalls is a really good first step. All right, more next time.